My neighborhood was picturesque, the kind they advertise on billboards to entice weary city folk. Manicured lawns, pastel-painted mailboxes, kids riding bikes beneath a canopy of maple trees. People here cared about appearances, but behind the picket fences simmered tension. And at the center of it all, pulling the strings like a suburban puppeteer, was Cindy Holloway, our self-appointed, dictatorially righteous HOA president. I first ran afoul of Cindy because of a gate. My gate, to be exact. I'd installed a reinforced steel gate after my elderly father suffered a fall. Safety seemed reasonable enough, right? Well, not to Cindy. The violation notice fluttered ominously from my mailbox like an eviction letter. Non-compliant installation, it proclaimed in red ink. Moments later, my doorbell chimed. There she stood, Cindy herself, holding her clipboard like a badge of office. Her face bore that self-righteous smirk of superiority that suggested she ate HOA bylaws for breakfast. "Andrew, dear," she began, voice dripping with saccharine condescension. "We can't have people disregarding community standards, can we?" I took a breath, hoping reason might win out. "Cindy, it's for my dad's safety. The gate's tasteful and matches my home perfectly." She eyed the gate as if I'd erected a junkyard fence. "It's about uniformity," she corrected sharply. "Rules exist for a reason. If you bend one, what's next? Goats on lawns? Neon flamingos?" She paused, eyes gleaming, clearly enjoying her imaginary slippery slope. "Remove it by Monday or fines will begin accruing." She spun on her heel, victorious. But I stood there dumbfounded, pulse quickening. My father's safety versus Cindy's absurd ego. War had been declared. The days that followed turned absurd. Notes appeared taped to my car, citing infractions I never imagined existed. Weeds. Exceed 2 inches. Mailbox slightly crooked. Bird feeder visible from street. Each petty ticket deepened my frustration, yet each confrontation was more infuriatingly hilarious than the last. Once, Cindy burst onto my lawn, measuring tape in hand, declaring my grass precisely 1/8 inch above regulation. I wondered how her husband survived. But laughter died when fines piled up. The notices evolved into threats. One night, I awoke to flashing headlights piercing through my blinds. Sprinting outside, I watched in horror as Cindy, in a moment of hysterical madness, revved her oversized SUV and charged at my gate like an enraged rhinoceros. Metal shrieked as the SUV crunched into steel, wheels spinning helplessly. Cindy's plan, like her sanity, faltered spectacularly. Neighbors appeared, phones recording the chaos. Police arrived moments later, pulling Cindy, red-faced and screaming, from her wrecked vehicle. "I was enforcing rules!" she shrieked as cuffs clicked shut. Justice, it seemed, had finally been served. Or so I thought. The next day, Cindy's followers held a vigil outside my home. They left passive-aggressive notes like floral offerings, portraying her as some martyr for community values. "We're watching," one warned ominously. For weeks, peace returned. Cindy's arrest was a breath of relief. Neighbors even congratulated me, though they did so cautiously, glancing nervously over shoulders as if her ghost lingered. But Cindy wasn't done. She emerged quickly, unscathed and emboldened by a slap-on-the-wrist sentence. Worse, she'd convinced the city council to revoke my gate permit, labeling it a public hazard. That night, she appeared at my doorstep again, eyes cold, vindictive. "See, Andrew?" she purred. "You can't win against me." Something inside me snapped, not into anger, but resolve. I'd tolerated enough. Cindy wanted war. I'd give her war. Over weeks, I secretly gathered allies. Cindy had more enemies than friends. Surveillance footage of her nighttime SUV fiasco mysteriously surfaced on neighborhood forums. People whispered. Confidence in Cindy began to wobble, yet she refused to yield. Fines doubled, then tripled. Legal threats arrived in polished envelopes. My bank account groaned under the weight of her tyranny. Then, one crisp autumn morning, as I sipped coffee and stared out at my beleaguered gate, an envelope slid under my door. Inside was a single photograph. Cindy, caught red-handed in an unmistakably illegal act, bribing a city inspector. I smiled bitterly, savoring the irony. Her downfall was within reach, but I knew better than to strike prematurely. Cindy's arrogance would be her undoing, and I was patient. As I tucked the photo away, the phone rang sharply, making my heart leap. A strained voice whispered urgently, "Andrew, it's time. Cindy called an emergency meeting tonight. She plans to force you out." I glanced again at the incriminating photo. Cindy had finally overplayed her hand. Tonight, I'd reclaim our neighborhood. The clubhouse buzzed like a beehive, neighbors whispering anxiously as I stepped inside. Cindy, front and center at her makeshift tribunal, wore her best disappointed mother expression. Beside her, the HOA board shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze as if proximity to rebellion was contagious. Cindy cleared her throat dramatically, bringing silence. "Andrew," she began, mock sadness in her tone, "it's come to our attention that you're actively undermining our community standards." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. "By installing a safety gate for my elderly father?" She smiled thinly, her voice artificially patient. "By defying established regulations and encouraging dissent. Frankly, Andrew, it's bordering on treasonous." Someone coughed sharply, hiding laughter, but Cindy shot them a murderous glare. Her face reddened beneath the makeup. "We're recommending immediate removal of your gate, at your expense." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cindy raised her hand, silencing them immediately. Her power was frighteningly absolute. I took a steadying breath, trying to remain calm despite the rage simmering beneath my skin. "I'm curious," I said, my voice deceptively calm. "Does everyone know you bribed a city inspector to revoke my permit?" Gasps erupted. Cindy faltered briefly, eyes flickering with uncertainty, but recovered instantly. "Baseless accusations won't save you, Andrew. Where's your proof?" My stomach twisted painfully. I'd been baited into revealing my trump card too early. Without immediate proof to show, my advantage crumbled. Cindy sensed this, a triumphant gleam returning to her eyes. "I'm prepared to give you one last chance, Andrew," Cindy said patronizingly. "Apologize publicly, remove your gate, comply, and we'll consider leniency." All eyes shifted to me. Compliance meant humiliation. Resistance meant war. "No," I replied, firm but quiet. Cindy's smile vanished. "Then you've chosen consequences." She adjourned the meeting abruptly, storming out like a general preparing for battle. I lingered behind, neighbors whispering hurried apologies before dispersing nervously. Days later, I woke to find my gate painted fluorescent pink, adorned with glittering plastic flamingos. Cindy's twisted sense of humor. Notes plastered my yard. "Eyesore! Remove now!" Clearly, Cindy's supporters had rallied, emboldened by her unchallenged dominance. My father watched from the window, distressed. "Son, maybe we should just—" "No," I interrupted gently. "She doesn't get to win." But Cindy wasn't finished. She'd begun wielding influence far beyond the HOA. Overnight, city officials cited me for building code violations I'd never heard of. Police arrived, sympathetic but helpless, shaking heads as they documented trivial infractions. Bills stacked, higher. My sleep suffered, nights spent pacing restlessly, plotting how to dismantle Cindy's empire of control. I reached out discreetly to neighbors who'd faced Cindy's wrath, collecting whispered horror stories, each one more absurd and infuriating than the last. Yet, as allies emerged, Cindy retaliated harder. Overnight, she implemented new HOA rules so restrictive neighbors were fined for basketball hoops, garden gnomes, even wind chimes. My gate became symbolic resistance, a rallying cry. Then came the final insult, a city letter declaring my father's medical accommodations unnecessary, demanding the gate's removal within 72 hours or face escalating fines. I confronted Cindy outside her perfectly maintained home, rage barely restrained. "You won't get away with this," she laughed, smugness radiating from every pore. "I already have, Andrew. The city agrees with me, and soon you'll understand your place in this community." I lowered my voice, locking eyes fiercely with hers. "Keep pushing, Cindy. You're about to find out exactly what kind of place you really hold." She smiled venomously. Idle threats from a defeated man. But Cindy underestimated my resolve. I had quietly rallied support. With just hours left, I organized a community meeting. my last chance. That evening, neighbors filled my backyard, murmuring anxiously. Cindy's spies lurked at the edges, reporting my every word. I stepped onto a makeshift stage holding up a thick binder filled with damning evidence. "Cindy's reign ends tonight," I began, my voice firm yet trembling slightly. "Every harassment, every bribe, every illegal act documented here." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Hope flickered in their faces, mingled with lingering fear of Cindy's retribution. From the back, a voice shouted, "She'll just ruin us too." Suddenly, Cindy emerged from the shadows, eyes blazing. "Pathetic attempts at defamation," she hissed, voice dripping venom. "You think paper threats scare me?" My heart raced. This was the moment I'd planned, my final move. But Cindy's unwavering arrogance unnerved me. She stepped closer, her voice barely audible yet, cutting like glass. "You think you have leverage, Andrew? Think again." She thrust a folder into my hands, eyes dark with satisfaction. "Read it." I hesitated, dread knotting in my stomach. Opening it, my heart stopped. Inside were photographs, me with the inspector, who'd revoked my gate permit, exchanging an envelope in broad daylight. I'd never seen this photo. It was doctored, perfectly staged, damningly believable. Cindy leaned closer, whispering softly, maliciously, "You're finished." The photograph shook in my hands, a convincing lie. Gasps rippled through the crowd, neighbors glancing uneasily at one another. Cindy stood before me, smugly triumphant, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, savoring her victory. "You went too far, Andrew," she declared loudly, addressing the stunned crowd as though sentencing a criminal. "Bribery? Corruption? Is this who we want defining our community?" The murmurs grew louder. My stomach twisted painfully. My father, frail but determined, stepped up beside me, gripping my arm. "Don't let her win," he whispered. My heart steadied. I glanced around, seeing the flicker of doubt spreading through the crowd. Cindy had made her move, and now it was time for mine. "You're right, Cindy," I began clearly. "This photo is disturbing." She smiled triumphantly, sensing victory. "Finally admitting your guilt?" "No," I said evenly, voice rising. "But someone else should." I turned toward the crowd. "Did any of you wonder how Cindy obtained this photo? Convenient timing, isn't it?" A murmur of agreement swept the gathering. Cindy's eyes narrowed, confidence faltering. "It speaks for itself," she snapped. "Actually," a voice called out sharply, stepping into the light, "I took that picture." Everyone turned to see Mark Reynolds, the very city inspector Cindy had bribed. Cindy paled instantly. Mark stared directly at her, voice firm and unwavering. "Cindy paid me generously to stage that photo. She threatened my job if I didn't." Gasps erupted. Cindy's jaw dropped, her eyes darting desperately around, seeking allies. But faces once loyal now wore expressions of shock. "You're lying," she shrieked, hysteria replacing composure. "You can't prove that." Mark calmly held up his phone. "I recorded our conversation, Cindy. Did you really think I trusted you?" Her mouth opened soundlessly, disbelief flooding her features. I stepped forward, finally taking control. "It seems you've manipulated and threatened your way into power," I announced, voice steady and strong. "But it ends now." Neighbors nodded solemnly, moving closer in silent solidarity. Cindy backed, away, eyes wild, frantically scanning for allies. Her supporters slowly retreated, ashamed to have been her pawns. "You don't understand," she shouted, eyes frantic. "I did this for all of you, to maintain order." But no one was listening. Cindy had unraveled, exposed by her own desperate grasp for power. Suddenly, sirens sliced through the tense air. Flashing lights filled the street. Cindy turned, panicked, as two officers approached swiftly, their faces stern. "Cindy Harmon," one officer announced loudly. "You're under arrest for bribery, harassment, and conspiracy to commit property damage." Neighbors watched silently as handcuffs clicked tightly around Cindy's wrists. She struggled briefly, then turned toward me, eyes filled with hatred. "This isn't over, Andrew." "Oh, Cindy," I sighed quietly. "It ended the moment you crashed into my gate." The cruiser door slammed shut, sealing Cindy's humiliating exit. Neighbors gathered closer, relief and laughter breaking through tension like sunlight piercing clouds. Weeks passed quickly. The gate stayed, repainted tastefully, a symbol now of resilience rather than oppression. Peace returned, sweeter than before, though cautious whispers still echoed of Cindy's spectacular downfall. Eventually, the community elected a new HOA president, someone known for kindness rather than control. Cindy's legacy evaporated quickly, leaving only whispered stories of her absurd reign as cautionary tales. And then, on a tranquil evening weeks later, my phone rang unexpectedly. Andrew? My blood chilled instantly, recognizing Cindy's clipped tone. "What do you want, Cindy?" "I need you," she murmured desperately. "They're treating me terribly here. You have to speak on my behalf. Tell them I wasn't as awful as—" "It seemed," I chuckled softly, savoring the irony. "You asking me for help?" "Please," she whispered hoarsely, voice trembling. "I've lost everything. You're my only chance." I paused, watching my father through the window, enjoying his quiet evening. Memories flooded back, her vindictive joy, my father's distress, endless sleepless nights. Finally, softly, I said, "No, Cindy. You made your bed. Enjoy lying in it." I hung up gently, the final thread severed. Outside, neighbors laughed warmly, the sound drifting through my open window. My father smiled, safe behind the gate that had started it all. In trying to destroy me, Cindy had only succeeded in destroying herself. As darkness settled gently over our reclaimed neighborhood, I stared proudly at my gate, symbol of defiance, now adorned with strings of friendly lights and supportive notes from neighbors declaring victory. In poetic justice, Cindy's prized home, the epicenter of her oppressive rule, had quietly been seized by the city for multiple unpaid fines, stemming from her own frivolous citations. Tonight, I raised a toast to her downfall. "Here's to Cindy," I murmured with satisfaction. The woman who believed herself untouchable, only to be destroyed by her own rules. Ironically, Cindy's orderly house now sat empty, overrun with weeds she'd once fined others for, a glowing monument to her own defeat.